I love you.
I know.
I love you. I love you. I love you. God bless you.
At noon on September 10th, during a defense session on the campus of Utah Valley University, Charlie Kirk was struck by a bullet fired from 100 meters away while delivering his speech, losing his life at the young age of 31.
Violence. Great.
His death sent shockwaves around the world, with tributes and support pouring in across the United States, from the president, vice president, and members of Congress down to ordinary citizens. Let's first take a look at what America's political leaders had to say.
To my great fellow Americans, I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah. Charlie inspired millions, and tonight, all who knew him and loved him are united in shock and horror. Charlie was a patriot who devoted his life to the cause of open debate and the country that he loved so much, the United States of America. He fought for liberty, democracy, justice, and the American people. He's a martyr for truth and freedom, and there's never been anyone who was so respected by youth. Charlie was also a man of deep faith.
So I wanted to use this show today to advocate for Charlie, to talk about him, to talk about what kind of a guy he was, to talk about what kind of a man he was, what kind of a husband and father he was, and to take people, most of them from inside the administration, but some of them from without, who knew Charlie best, and to talk about what he meant to them, what he meant to this administration, and what he meant to the conservative movement.
Charlie had such faith and such belief, and he wanted to share that truth with others. And what he was trying to do is pull people back from the abyss, not just to save a country, but to save souls. That's what Charlie Kirk was about. And that will resonate. It goes far beyond him. His legacy is immeasurable.
And Charlie, more than any figure in our country, led the resistance that has restored freedom of speech to this country. And he built this movement, which is going to make sure that that never, ever happens again.
Not only that, but the death of Charlie Kirk quickly spread across the globe, with people expressing their grief, reflections, and awakening on the X platform in different ways. In London, 300,000 people took to the streets chanting, "We are Charlie Kirk, for Britain, for faith, for the children." In Italy, young people celebrated the revival of faith. In South Korea, youth raised American flags not only to mourn Charlie, but also to demonstrate the strength of their alliance with the US. In Tokyo, Japan, there were both flowers laid in tribute and protest gatherings. In New Zealand, Maori Christians performed the traditional haka dance in memory of Charlie. Even in Africa, people found their own ways to express sorrow and a renewed commitment to their beliefs. Let's once again revisit Charlie's speech, where he said that everything he did was a struggle for the future of America.
Good evening. It is an honor to be with you tonight. My name is Charlie Kirk. I run the largest pro-American student organization in the country, Turning Point USA, fighting for the future of our republic. Speaking to you in my personal capacity tonight as a 26-year-old, I see the angst of young people as well as the challenges facing new parents. I am here tonight to tell you, to warn you, that this election is a decision between preserving America as we know it and eliminating everything that we love.
On September 15th, the Wall Street Journal published an article titled, "The Death of Charlie Kirk Sounds the Rallying Cry for the Global Right Wing." The article stated, "For those not often exposed to America's conservative online circles, until last week, Charlie Kirk was hardly a household name outside the US. But his shooting death sparked reactions among right-wing figures abroad. From national leaders to fringe influencers, they hailed Kirk as a martyr of a global movement." Why are people around the world shedding tears for a stranger? Japanese netizens have said that the assassination of Charlie Kirk is not only an attack on one individual, but also an assault on freedom of speech and democratic values. Some Chinese netizens said, Charlie Kirk was a legendary martyr, so young, so promising, with a boundless future ahead of him. What was even rarer was that he was fearless in the face of danger, indifferent to fame and fortune, and dedicated himself to spreading the truth taught by the Christian faith. He guided young students who had been brainwashed and poisoned by communism, radical Islam, and LGBTQ ideology back to the right path, back to common sense, and saved many lost souls. Some even said that he was the second person after Socrates in 399 BC to die for defending the truth through debate. Other netizens said that we are now in the midst of a spiritual battle, and Charlie Kirk was one of our great warriors standing against hatred and lies with love and truth. He was not a politician, he was the most influential conservative public speaker among young Americans. His spirit will live on forever. On the one hand, there has been worldwide mourning for Charlie. On the other hand, less than 48 hours after Kirk's assassination, one of China's largest nationalist propaganda websites, Guancha featured on its homepage an article titled, "The Death of Kirk is Lighter Than a Feather." Let us now listen to the analysis of Jiang Feng, host of an American current affairs commentary channel. This article begins by quoting Mao Zedong to set the tone for the entire piece, claiming that Kirk's death was in service of fascists and those who exploit and oppress the people, and therefore lighter than a feather. The article describes Kirk's death with extreme glee and lays out its central logic. He got what he deserved. It goes on to say that Kirk spent his life advocating for gun rights, yet was shot dead during a debate on gun violence. This is a textbook example of utterly rogue logic. Why do I call it rogue logic? Because it deliberately confuses a basic concept. What was Kirk doing? He was defending a right granted by the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. That is a political stance, but when a criminal uses illegal violence to take another person's life, that is a criminal act. If the phrase "he got what he deserved" was merely a rhetorical trick, the next line exposes the author and the massive propaganda machine behind him for what they truly are. The article states, "Just for this man's slanderous lies against China, I will not show him the slightest pity." This sentence is the key to the entire article. It tears off all disguises and bluntly tells the world that the reason they celebrate Kirk's death is not about guns, nor about left versus right, but simply because he was an enemy of the Chinese Communist Party. Therefore, in their eyes, he did not deserve any sympathy, and his death was seen as deserved and inevitable. This article is, in recent years, the most shameless and brazen eulogy for political assassination I have seen published by a media outlet with official backing. It is not reporting or commenting on the news event, it's transmitting to hundreds of millions of Chinese readers under its influence one of the most terrifying value systems. That in the face of our enemies, violence is not only acceptable, it's righteous. That the death of an enemy is not regrettable, but even worth celebrating. Just a few hours after Charlie Kirk's assassination, major online platforms such as X and TikTok were suddenly flooded with a large amount of false information. At a press conference on September 11th, Utah Governor Spencer Cox stated that the FBI had already received more than 7,000 tips related to the case, but most of them were disinformation originating from the Chinese Communist Party and Russia.
There is a tremendous amount of disinformation. We are tracking our team, the state team, and I'm sure the federal team as well. What we're seeing is our adversaries want violence. China, we have bots from Russia, China, all over the world that are trying to instill disinformation and encourage violence.
In response, Yayao Yuan, professor and chair of international studies at the University of St. Thomas, believes that the Chinese Communist Party is taking the opportunity to spread false information with the aim of confusing the public, deepening divisions among the American people, and weakening the cohesion of the U.S. The reason why the Chinese Communist Party is doing this is essentially to use online disinformation to create divisions within American society. It wants to divide American society, making conservative and liberal forces more radical and more confrontational, so that American society appears more turbulent. In addition, Chiangpin Chao, an author invited by the U.S. Library of Commerce for its collections, believes that inciting violence and spreading disinformation to mislead people is one of the means by which the Chinese Communist Party maintains its regime. Now, the CCP has already exported these tactics overseas. They use the masses to fight against the masses, monitor the masses, collect people's information, and then constantly impose their form of terrorism on them. They want to use this kind of terrorism to achieve their goals and to build the society of domination they dream of. This is a very important reason why the Communist Party uses disinformation to manipulate public opinion. So why does the CCP's propaganda machine harbor such deep-seated hatred toward a 31-year-old young American? Why do they use the most prominent coverage, the most vicious language, and even deploy their deeply hidden overseas agents to celebrate his death? Jiang Feng, host of a U.S. political commentary channel, has provided a very thorough analysis of this.
答案其实很简单，却又令人不寒而栗。
The answer is actually very simple, yet chilling. Charlie Kirk, more directly and more effectively than any other conservative leader of his generation, drove a sharp blade into the CCP's most important and most hidden long-term strategic investment in the United States, the battle for the minds of America's next generation of elites. The main battlefield of this war is on American college campuses. For decades, the CCP's infiltration of American universities has been a carefully orchestrated grand strategy. It began with the establishment of Confucius Institutes, later rebranded into all kinds of pervasive language and cultural centers. It extended to massive funding for university research projects and laboratories, to convert influence and manipulation of student associations and academic organizations, and further to the subtle ideological reshaping of young people through social media platforms such as TikTok. The CCP's goal has never been about winning a particular debate today, but about winning an entire generation. It seeks to cultivate a generation of future American politicians, scientists, entrepreneurs, and cultural figures who view the CCP's brutal rule with understanding, sympathy, or even admiration. They want to build a firewall in the minds of young Americans, equating anti-CCP criticism with radical prejudice, and framing human rights critiques of the CCP as ignorance of China's realities. They attempt to blur the boundary between democracy and dictatorship with the smokescreen of cultural relativism and to erode the moral foundation of free societies with the lure of economic interests. The CCP has played this game with extreme patience and remarkable secrecy. And what is Kirk in this context? Kirk is like a reckless intruder who dragged the silent war into the open, debating it in the most straightforward, sharp, and provocative terms, placing it squarely on the lawns of American campuses before tens of thousands of students, and amplifying it even further through social media. Jiang Feng also specifically pointed out, what were the topics of Kirk's debate events when the CCP tried to erase its responsibility for the COVID-19 pandemic with the grand narrative of a community of common destiny for mankind? Kirk and his organization, Turning Point USA, repeatedly referred to the virus on campuses across the US as the China virus or the CCP virus. This was not merely a dispute over terminology. With a simple label, they drove a nail of accountability firmly into the forehead of the CCP regime, ensuring that young people would never forget where the pandemic originated. When the CCP used the lie of one country, two systems to cover up its brutal suppression of Hong Kong's freedoms, Kirk repeatedly invoked the names of Jimmy Lai, of young activist Agnes Chow, and the countless Hong Kong youths who shed blood on the streets. He reminded American students that the CCP's promises are worthless, that what has happened to Hong Kong today is the fate Taiwan will face tomorrow, and the price all free nations will pay if they choose appeasement. Up until September 5th, less than a week before his assassination, Charlie Kirk had traveled to South Korea, urging young Koreans to recognize the dangers of communism. This further confirmed just how great a threat he was to the CCP.
让年轻人永远记住这场灾难的源头在哪里。
When the CCP tried to use its economic achievements to cover up its brutal domestic repression, Kirk tirelessly explained to politically indifferent young people how the CCP was stealing America's intellectual property, hollowing out U.S. manufacturing through unfair trade, and buying up American farmland to threaten America's food security. He translated complex geopolitical and economic issues into the simplest, most direct warnings that related to the future livelihoods of every young person. He went even further, drawing a direct line between the woke culture and cultural Marxism he criticized on campuses and the CCP's own methods of ideological control. Where does America's woke cultural Marxism come from? From the CCP. The same force suppressing dissent in Tiananmen Square is also the force suppressing free speech and pushing cancel culture on American campuses. Once that connection was made, once that equation was drawn, it became fatal for the CCP. If the CCP's infiltration strategy is like termites silently eating away at the foundation of America's great building, then what Kirk did was take a loudspeaker and a detector. With the loudspeaker, he told young people that the entire building was in danger. With the detector, he located the nests of termites one by one. Through Turning Point USA, he established chapters on hundreds of American college campuses, creating a grassroots network that the CCP's United Front tactics could neither easily buy nor suppress. He was not speaking at congressional hearings to a room full of suited politicians. He was standing under the sun on college lawns, debating face-to-face with young people in t-shirts and jeans. He turned anti-CCP sentiment from a political issue in Washington into a youth movement sweeping across American campuses. Regarding Kirk's assassination, Zheng Feng's view sharply struck at the heart of the issue. The Communist Party fears sanctions from the White House, but what it truly dreads is losing its influence over the minds of America's next generation. Sanctions can be passed on to the ordinary people living under CCP rule. But if America's next generation says no to the CCP, then the resources owned by the CCP elite can no longer be converted into real power or wealth.
那中共权贵拥有的资源将无法变现。
What Kirk set out to do was to uproot the ideological foundation that the CCP had spent decades cultivating on American campuses. So when the bullet was fired, in the eyes of the CCP's propaganda machine, it struck not merely a political opponent, but a mortal threat, the one who could completely dismantle their century-long plan. That is why the Chinese Communist Party cheered. It was not mere schadenfreude, it was the unrestrained joy of a would-be conqueror who had just seen his most formidable opponent fall. Yet history is often filled with irony. Although the bullet ended Kirk's life, it may have given his message a kind of immortality, sanctified in martyrdom. In just 48 hours, one can see in America that more and more people who once identified as leftists suddenly turned away from the extreme left, and many who had distanced themselves from America's traditional way of life suddenly returned to the church. Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA, seems to have, through his near-sacrificial moment, rekindled Americans' sense of faith and righteousness.
辩论比子弹更有力量。谢谢大家。